Peace. This is Rakeem Allah with Wise the Dome TV. Today I have journalist, author, radio host, martial artist, teacher of knowledge itself, the God Sunez Allah. Appreciate you for coming on, G.
Peace to the God.
Peace, peace. So you've published mad articles, with the Vibe, the Source, Hip Hop DX. How did you get your start in journalism, in hip hop journalism and writing for those platforms?
Yeah, it really is my old earth. My mother remembered imperfection because
Rest in
she was
peace.
the one that always made me write. Growing up Puerto Rican, though, she didn't want anybody to have an accent, anything to be stigmatizing, I mean, that was a big deal for her. So if we could write perfectly, we could speak perfectly and stuff like that, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Of
right.
course, I always butchered those things up because, I end up abusing the language and,
Right.
once you master it, you know what I mean? But once I got into college at CUNY's Baruch College, she also pestered me and my twin brother to have some kind of extracurricular activity. You know what I mean? And since I wasn't going to make the MBA,
Right.
I decided that I'll probably be, a good writer and stuff. But I didn't know what to write about, though.
Right,
At the
right.
time, I didn't really, you know what I mean?
Right.
All I could think of was to write about what I liked.
Right, right.
And my brother was at the Baruch College's newspaper, The Ticker. So I said, let me write there because we know that's one thing that we know how to do, and I could write something. I'll write about hip hop.
Right.
The thing is that when I started writing about hip hop, even though I hardly had a record collection.
Right.
So I grew up with hip hop, but I didn't really have records.
Right.
I mean, of my own, I recorded things off the radio and everything, but I didn't buy records and nothing like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
But my first piece was, and it's an important piece in my career because it kind of launches everything that I do. But the first piece that I ever wrote that got published in some kind of print was called The 3 R's That Feed and Starve Hip Hop. You know what I mean? And it was the 3 R's were record labels, R&B, and radio.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And I kind of built on why, those things are, you know what I mean? And even with a, very little knowledge of the industry and stuff, I was still able to break down what I was doing, the knowledge too, and the lyrics and stuff,
Right.
and present some type of understanding about it. This is November 1994. Right. And like I said, Baruch College at the time was a campus of leased buildings, so your classes were spread out through an area of Lower Manhattan. And I didn't know it then, and I would soon find out that all the record labels were around there.
Right, right.
Also from like 20th Street, 19th Street, Union Square, Vibe Magazine, record labels, major stuff. If you kept walking, you'd hit Fat Beats. If you took a little bit of a long stroll, you could get there. So all this hip hop was around there and stuff. And to show you how green I was, like, and how interesting it was, I really wasn't a reader unless it was something for school. So I didn't really know my talents as a writer.
Right.
Going to college and having gaps between classes was the first time I ever saw a magazine shop.
Wow. Right.
I did not read, yeah.
Right.
I did not read. If it wasn't, you know what I mean?
But that's kind of crazy now because you like on a book a week now, right?
Yeah. That's the average, yeah. But the thing about it was when I walked into the magazine shop, I was like, oh shit, I went to the sports section. I said, that's what I know. I read some sports shit. Sure. And I saw the Source magazine with Tribe Called Quest on the cover. And I said, oh shit, they got the music I like on fucking magazines too.
Right.
And then I started to dig in there, and that stuck in my head. You know what I mean? I started to read those magazines instead of sports. So while I was writing I started my own column called Sunset Style. Okay. Because I'm from Sunset Park, Brooklyn.
Right.
And, I had my brother, my man Smo, draw me up a wild style, but with Sunset Style, you know what I mean?
Right.
And I started to write these really inflammatory articles in college that got me into trouble. I was cursing. I was doing all types of stuff in them, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so what happened was other brothers that was going to the college, they saw it. And they saw those articles. And a lot of them were early people that started. They weren't the they were like the first staff of Double XL.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, would be, you know, the first, probably maybe like the first two staffs.
Okay.
But at the time, though, they were just getting in the door at Vibe.
Mm.
So that's how I got at Vibe. A lot of the difference in the career is that I didn't really quit college.
Right. Right.
They
Okay.
did, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a combination of two things. They quit college and they pursued that full time. And also they wrote about things I wouldn't write about.
Yeah.
I mean,
Like,
it's that simple.
mm,
And that was one of the reasons why I didn't really see writing as a career. You know what I mean?
right.
Because they had things I wouldn't write about. I was like, I ain't writing about that. You know
Right.
what I mean?
So did you kind of see it like was it the fact that they were shining a light on the more commercialized aspects of the culture, and what kind of things was it that you were kind of like, man, I ain't feeling that.
I think in the beginning, though, it was a lack of criticism that was kind of allowed.
Right.
Like once you start working in the 90s, this is all the way in the 90s, like mid 90s, once you started working at a magazine, you no longer are a vicious critique for the culture. What you
Right.
really are, though, is a vicious critique for anything that stops the culture from making money.
Mm.
You know, so now every endeavor that's going to blow up, though, is a righteous endeavor for the culture.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So, for example, in 1994, I always had a lot of problems because I'm from Medina, right? And
Right.
I have always been critical of what Biggie was doing. I was always critical about what Puffy was doing and things like that. Those things had no space. So, for example, when Double XL started, that was really inspired off of Reasonable Doubt. That was really their album.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Right.
You go back into the early things, it had Jay-Z as the first it wasn't
Okay.
even the premiere issue, it was the preview issue.
Okay. Okay.
The one that they send out to people to promote the magazine.
Right.
Whereas I'm a young kid and I'm running in there saying, I don't know, there's things that he's doing I don't like. And like I said, I'm not just judging the skill level of things. I'm judging what they're actually doing as far as promoting stuff. So certain things don't become a big deal. Like, okay, he has talent though, but it's kind of a watered down Cuban Links. He has talent, but he's kind of biting the EPMD sample for a hit. You know what I mean?
Right.
He didn't do anything to it. Like, these are supposedly big. People don't understand it now, but in 1996, 94, 95, it wasn't just the sound of the sample that was joyous, but also the dig, the quality of the dig. So I couldn't criticize these things without being an early hater or not really with the move. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Also, yeah, so those things led me to just be on the periphery more and more,
Right.
And of course, my own way of, because I was burning bridges like hell, though.
Yeah. So so it's kind of like it was these platforms operate as a part of the machine, right? So,
well, absolutely, and that's I think that's a precedent that was set by the source way before I ever got in there.
Okay.
Because that they would be, for them to survive, they would have to promulgate the success of this, because at the time it wasn't seen that hip hop would continue like that, or that it even would be like prosper, where you could even have a magazine that would sell, so anything that helps the culture prosper. So that's why you have a lot of you have a lot of back and forth that seems to stay in the middle ground.
Yeah.
Like when Doggy Style comes out and people are criticizing it for its content, if it's going too far and things like that. These are things that, magazines like The Source and others would just stay even keeled with.
Right.
Because the success of that album is going to make this a bigger magazine. It's going to make media a real thing. So all these things, they contribute. And I see that in retrospect. I didn't see that one at the time. You know what I mean?
Right.
At the time, it's just like the quality of it, what I'm talking about. And, I'm burning bridges, as I just open my mouth every moment. You know what I mean?
Right. So
that's
I was going to say, like, what ways were you burning bridges?
Well, like, let's say, like I told you about Jay-Z, or in the 90s when I would, I'd walk in and I thought, people were cool with me or whatever I was thinking and stuff like that, or at least to offer it. And I would lambast, you know, the ridiculousness of No Limit Records and how they're just selling diluted material. You know what I mean? Because you know, 75-minute albums. You know that, you know, and then when you look at the magazine and that they all these ads are paying for the magazine,
Right.
criticism for the albums becomes less and less a thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You
'Cause I
can't
remember they
talk.
used to have No Limit used to have a big ad in the back of the Source magazine
Yeah,
every
yeah. And, you
issue.
know, by the 2000s, these ads would cost you about 30 G's, you know, 40
Mm,
G's, you know, like
mm.
they weren't
Okay.
small, you know,
Right.
like they were huge. Like if you lost it, you lost a chunk of the ads, you know,
Okay.
and of your money. Cause you know, the subscription doesn't pay the bills, you know, it's really the
Right.
ads that pays the bills, you know.
I
But
think that's something that a lot of people that are you know, fans of these type of publications probably don't realize is it's not the subscription or the online subscription or the clicks that keeps these
right,
things
right.
going, man. It's the relationships that they have with these artists that may possibly compromise the type of content that comes out from them.
Right, right. And now that the music is older, it's almost like an unsaid payola. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right,
Unscripted payola. It doesn't have to be blatant though. You know what I
right,
mean?
right,
You don't even have to wink. You know, like this is what they do. This is what they're looking for, and you'd be surprised. Like you know, today's era is more like, you know, people are they get in by selling out. So they
right,
don't really sell out. They sell in. You know what I mean?
right, right,
So there's
right.
no, you know, you got to be authentic to sell out. You know,
Yeah,
they sell in. They already know the package that they must have in order to get in, and
right.
it's all accepted. So it's a much different thing now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But because of that, it led me to have a career that went everywhere. You
Mm.
know,
Hmm.
if you look at it in retrospect, if you look at my career, it looks like I traveled all of these places, and it's really more that I was a homeless writer. You know what I mean?
Right, right. I got you.
Yeah, it's more like I was a homeless writer. Because the other major thing is that in my own personal writing,
Hmm.
I didn't want to be a writer that just wrote about the culture. I wanted to be part of the culture.
Right,
I wanted to
right.
contribute to the culture. So even as early as 1995, I wrote in my college columns where I had freedom
Hmm.
that in order for the journalists, the hip hop journalists to be worthwhile, they would have to be creative.
Right,
And they
right.
would have to do something creative so they could be the fifth element.
Mm,
You know,
mm.
and these are things that the people that were around me in other magazines they saw. And you know, they took some of those things, and that's
Yeah,
where you got
yeah.
Fifth Element, and you know, the
That's
Fifth
what I was
Element.
going to ask you, God, is like I've noticed like with your writing, there's a certain rhythm to it. There's like a poetry and there's an art to it, even while you're writing about the art, right? And you don't really see that with a lot of other writers, especially writers within the culture. It's kind of like your writing style is like a verse. You know what I'm saying? Is that
Right,
something
right.
that you cognitively, you know, set out to do, or it just happened over time? Like, how did you come on like your
It's
writing style?
absolutely overt where I can't really change it now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, I wanted it to be creative. You know, so my whole concept was to have creative elements in the prose of the piece.
hmm,
But as it went along, and like especially in the decade of the 2010s, where I had free reign at my own publishing source, you know, and everything like that, I started to do it overtly because the father, when I say like the hip hop writer is an element, the father of it is really Bones Malone,
yeah,
you know,
right, okay.
and it's because his columns they were hip hop related in vibe,
Hmm.
but they weren't about the music per se.
Mm,
And other writers, they would write some of their interview features, the feature stories with some creative prose,
hmm.
you know, and that would be in the line of literary journalism, like Gay Talese and others, you know, like before, like, you know, Frank Sinatra has a cold, and you write
Right.
these original pieces that are like, you novelize the artist that you're writing about.
Hmm.
I wanted to do something even further than that
Right.
because I wasn't just reading the writers that were out. I was reading Amiri Baraka,
Mm, right. Right.
you know, and I realized that he was part of the culture. So I was like, what if I wrote the reviews and I embedded the poetry that was
Mm,
inspired by the albums that I read
mm,
and put them in there?
right.
you
That's
know,
deep.
and some of it would spill into the prose,
Hmm.
and some of it would be highlighted outside of the prose. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I started to do that, and that's really what I always wanted to do with the element. But in the magazines, it was either I wasn't writing about the music I loved,
Hmm.
I wasn't allowed to write about the music I loved, or a lot of my stuff was just, you know, so modified,
Right.
you know, to
Right.
fit the structure of a magazine, because a magazine goes through a conveyor belt when
Hmm.
it's edited, you know. So every magazine you read has a general sound, you
Right.
know,
Right.
and a lot of people, after a while, people weren't really calling me because I snag up the conveyor belt. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Right.
It's very hard to take a piece that I've written and then make it sound like a generic, you know, this is dope, this is hot, you know what I mean?
Right.
Shit like that. So uh, a lot of times people find my stuff impossible to work with,
Mm.
you know? So I just needed like my own forum to do it, you know what I mean? And when I started working on Premiere Hip Hop, that's when
Mm.
I really started to put the pieces out there and
Right.
really, you know, extend them, you know?
Right. Yeah, that's deep, God. And so with, you know, in hip hop, as far as if somebody does something that's new, or somebody does something that's, you know, dope and just bring something fresh to the game, right? You have people that will, you know, kind of jack that a little bit. Now, as far as, you know, producing rhyme styles and things of that nature, but what did you see people kind of biting your style when it comes to writing?
Oh man, I think people try, but they don't really know how to do it.
Right, 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 right.
You know what I mean? I
Right,
think that
right,
what I'm doing though is gonna take a long time for people to do it.
right,
You know what I
right.
mean? And nah, just you know, being truthful. My shit is too dope.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Niggas can't really do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I told you that, you know, a long time ago, man. You one of
Can't
the
really.
dopest that ever did it with this. You know what I mean? I meant that, God. Like,
That's peace, man. I appreciate that. You know what I mean? And then, you know, like I tell my students, you know, it's not the ability to do this was an idea from a long time ago, but it's hundreds and hundreds of pages
right,
to perfect it. You know what I
right,
mean?
right.
It's hundreds of pages to perfect it. So it comes out the way it comes out. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And it's really it's really about. I don't think I could do this if I wasn't able to also analyze the music in a way that people weren't analyzing it, because
Right,
then it would just be me um, taking advantage of other people's art
right,
to get
right,
my shit off.
right,
And that's why I always go, I'm doing art on art,
right.
but I have to have science on music. And so I spent a lot of time really studying music, you know, the
Mm-hmm.
textures of it,
Mm-hmm.
finding ways to really detail it in a way that people don't detail it. You know what I mean?
Right,
You know, knowing the albums. Because I'll tell you this, right? When you're a journalist, right, you could either know firsthand the experience of being of what being that of which you cover,
mm-hmm.
right? So if you're a journalist of war, maybe you were a former soldier. Usually not. So what you have to do is you have to know war so good that you
Mm.
know the contours of it, though you know the outer politics of it and everything, and you can go in.
Right,
With music, I didn't make music. When I tried to make music, it wasn't really my thing, you know. So like for me to make my own element, I tried all the other elements. You know what I'm saying?
right,
It's only now that people have, because of what I've made, people have me making stuff, you know, and recording music now.
right, right,
But as far as like straight rapping, that was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to represent myself fully.
mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And how words look on the page is really important to me. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah, yeah,
So the MC, it didn't always work for me. You know what
right.
I mean? And then, and I always had a problem with performance. You know what I mean? I
Mm-hmm.
always wanted to be just myself, you know what I mean? Be able to do that. And it fits the calling, you know. What I do is I lecture, I teach, you know, all these things. So these are the forms that I'm used to. DJing, though, and all those things, I could never be a DJ, you know,
Right,
because I could never just play what people want to hear. You know what I mean?
right.
I'd be terrible at it. You know
Play
what
what
I
I
mean?
want to hear.
Yeah, yeah. And if you don't like it, then, you know, but
Right.
you know, and then of course graffiti though, I have no artistic skill at all. You know what
Mm.
I mean?
Mhm.
So, all as far as I got was being a toy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Nowhere
Yeah.
even near anything legitimate. But I tried everything, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And it's really the analysis of music, really studying music theory, studying the roots of it, you know what I mean?
Right.
Making sure that what I was actually witnessing, I was witnessing as a journalist, but also as a future historian,
Right.
really trying to catalog that, because now I'm like a quarter century in.
Right.
So the things that I saw in the beginning are now documentation. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. That's,
So
yeah,
little,
indeed. Like,
yeah,
so what do you think about the state of like where, mainstream hip hop journalism is now? Is it kind of more the same? Like, is it on autopilot to the point where, it's just kind of the corporate machine at this point?
yeah. Autopilot's a good word for that. You
Mm.
know, the you know, I couldn't fault anybody for not being creative as they write.
Right.
That's gifts of a special writer.
Hmm.
But I find it crazy that after all these years of hip hop, people still can't write better articles about music. You know what I mean?
Right.
They can, like, and that also hurts the music, because when people see a review, and I don't care who it is, they see a review, and if it's well written, then they know that there might be something of value in the criticism.
Hmm.
That's just no way around it. I don't care what
Right.
artist is telling you what. It's not my experience though,
Right.
you know? And let's say like how I loved the 2010s. I thought it was a great era of hip hop.
Hmm.
The 2010s into now. I
Yeah,
love
it was. Hmm.
you know, and especially that decade. It was very powerful. But the beginning of the decade started with a lot of, especially a lot of boom bap, with a
Hmm.
lot of typical, very overused breakbeats,
Right. Right.
because a lot of young brothers were coming into their own though, and they basically were reinventing the wheel.
Hmm.
So like this is why you need journalism, because they're supposed to have the catalogs. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
They're supposed to have the catalogs, but it was just in the 2000s, which I call the dark ages, right? I always call it the dark ages.
What
I
made what,
remember,
what made you call them the Dark Ages, God?
oh man, the reason I call it the dark ages, right? Everything is your own personal experience. So obviously my own personal experience, right?
Mhm.
I always felt subtly blackballed,
Mm.
you know what I mean?
Right.
Because of the way I'm writing, what I'm trying to do, how vocal I am about music, but also pigeonholed as a so-called Puerto Rican writer. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Hmm.
There were so many magazines where I was only getting the Latino, rappers. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Even when I knew, let's say for example, I have the knowledge of self.
Right.
There's clearly not. You don't know something more than I do about those artists. You know what I mean? And a lot of
Right.
them I
Right.
know. So
Right.
it's like, wait
Right.
a minute.
Right.
And it still would happen where I wouldn't get to do it. I'd be like karaokeing certain albums and still not get the story.
Right. Right.
So it became a frustrating thing. And in the 2000s, the music became really popular. And a lot of it had to do with the way the journalism went.
Mhm.
People I was around, they were like, oh, look, and it's almost like I could feel myself veering off. And I saw that in the end of the 90s. But uh, signature moments, like for example, when Slim Shady came out,
Mhm.
and I remember certain writers and editors at magazines telling me, like, when I was still cool with them,
Right.
hey, you got to check out Slim Shady though. This guy might be the GOAT, like the greatest of
Wow.
all time. Like
Wow.
and in late 90s, the GOAT wasn't a word yet, so it'd be like,
Right.
well, he's one of the greatest. I was like,
Right.
and I'm like, are you kidding me? And just seeing things underrepresented,
Mhm.
um, Let's Get Free, Supreme Clientele, not seeing artists graduate, you know what I mean? The
Mhm.
Most Defs, the puns, they didn't really get that mainstream radio like you thought that they would, because
Right.
they definitely have commercial appeal.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then extending to today. But I saw so much pop stuff. And then, even as a Puerto Rican, because I saw the complete destruction of the possible use of hip hop as a culture in Puerto Rico
Mhm.
with reggaeton. You know what I mean? Once
Mm.
reggaeton started blowing up, nobody from Puerto Rico MC'd at all. Like they
Wow.
just didn't
Right.
MC.
Right.
You didn't do those. And it started where like you got to do one reggaeton song to blow up. And then
Mhm.
after that, it was just all of them. you know, and then this kind of trend where guys could do 80% commercial albums, but if they showed you they could rhyme on one song, then, you know, that's good enough, right?
Right.
We know they could rhyme.
Right. Right.
You know, and that started in 2000. That became a trend, you know? So that was very hard to cover. I mean, it's really hard to cover, you know? And I'm coming from, like I told you, I was coming from where I still find it abhorrent that Biggie put a pop record on Ready to Die. You know what I mean?
Right.
This is where I'm coming from. You know what I mean? I'm still like, you know? So you know, I called it the Dark Ages because everything veered off like that. You know what I mean? And even not just the commercialism, but even the artists that we needed to make greater records, they just couldn't find their way. You know, like Wu-Tang, they made lesser records.
Right.
Even when they made good records, they just didn't have the impact, or they weren't as quality. You know what I mean? So all in all, like, that was really why I called it that, you know. And the commercial buffoonery that we see today, though, you know, didn't just pop up. You know what I mean?
Right.
It had its slow growth. It had, you know, it had people, it had talents like Ludacris that, you know, they majored in they have more collegiate study in the business of music than me. And so they're giving you a product, and they're doing the Eazy-E model where they sell you a dumbed down product, but they know more than Eazy-E. You know what I mean? Right. So it's this cleverness that invades the industry, you know, like we're manipulating it for everything we can and shit. And that's why I mentioned the No Limit, like this manipulation. Like, we're not just going to give you good records, but we're also going to manipulate everything, you know? And
do you think that was just a way for, you know, with them coming from Louisiana, and, you know, around that time there were, you know, there were local artists from, you know, regions all across the country, but they weren't necessarily getting play in regions all across the country.
That's true, right? But let me be really brutal, right? In the, you know, during jazz's heyday, you know, nobody said, like, you know, he's not really from Louisiana or or New York and shit. So, you know, if he's not as good, though, you know, we let him in the gate, though. No. Miles Davis is from St. Louis, and he had to be damn good. Like, he had to be GOAT level to get in. You know, like, there's no acceptance of that. You know what I mean? And you don't really do that with other musics. Like, you don't get, like, you know, let's say, for example, like, you don't get you're not going to get, like, a band like Steel Pulse, because they're not from Jamaica. And, you know, they're not from Jamaica, so they could be a little weaker. You know, it's okay, you know? No, they have to be top notch, you know, to get in the gate. You don't see that with hip hop. It's like, oh, I'm representing where I'm from, though, so I could be a little shittier. You know what I mean? You see where I don't know where this comes from. You know, like, the standard isn't like the best of where you're from. Like, look at my height, right? In my family, I can dunk on everybody. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
That doesn't mean that I belong in the NBA. You know what I mean? Like, I'm awesome if we all play one-on-one here. You know, I'm the best. You know what I mean? But, you know, from this home, it's, you know, it's not much. You know what I mean? And that's kind of like the standard. Like, it feels like people act like hip hop has a right to be represented regionally. I don't really.
You don't think so?
I don't think it has a right. I think it's a culture and has a right that no one even has to ask for to be engaged in and performed. But as far as taking those steps and saying this is on the level of this, it doesn't work like that. You know what I mean?
So do you think that, okay, so around that time, what was it like as far as in these publications, in New York radio? When did you see gradually that these other regions began to get more play, and, you know, started becoming the sound that a lot of people
really,
tried to?
Yeah, it's really the digitizing of radio. You know what I mean? The digitizing of radio. You know, we always thought, you know, sports has all the analytics that are annoying and shit.
Right.
But the analytics invaded radio way before, you know, way before sports. You know what I mean?
Right.
And you'd be at places, though, and people would give you analytics about an artist that made no sense.
Right.
By the mid 2000s, if like I was at magazines doing best of list,
Mm-hmm.
and you see accounting jumping in the mix and saying, "Hey, we should put this record." I'm like, "What do
Like
you,
what?
like,
Right.
who are you?"
Right. Right.
You know,
Right. Right.
like,
Right.
and everybody gets their say because they could say what's not. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's blatant list of A-list artists and B-list artists that are really all based on their sales. They're not based on their quality.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? You also see trends that I was right there for. Like I know the people that invented them. Like, you know, video vixens, and let's write about, you know,
Yeah,
video
that
vixens and
was like a segment in one of the magazines, right, where they were
yeah, yeah.
highlighting
You know,
video
that was
vic.
Double XL. That was Double
Yeah,
XL that
yeah, I
started that.
remember that.
And as the trend went along, the video vixen highlight became counted as a female artist.
What?
So, for example, if it's 2006 and I go, yo, we should do a feature on Jean Grey, and they're like, yeah, I like Jean Grey, you know, because she's one that wasn't featured, right?
Right, right.
And but she wouldn't get a chance because when they go, Jean Grey, no, because we got like the girl that was in Many Men video or whatever, you know, that's in this shit, you know what I mean?
Right,
and she's
right.
gonna Heather Baxter or one of these chicks, you know what I mean?
Right, right.
And they're gonna be in there, so that counts as the female slot, you know.
Wow.
She don't do no art, like
right, right, right.
you know what I mean? She didn't even invent the clothes, like she didn't even invent the way you put on the clothes, like she didn't
right.
even do that shit. So, you know, these are things that I was firsthand there. I was there when the guy that invented that, I was there when he told me about it, like, hey, I got this new thing, you know, and I'm like,
was that popular with the readers?
I mean, you had a little small thing, whether her article asking if her tits are real, and we got like a couple of shots, you know, the eye candy section, you know what I mean? It was like, yeah, you know, people would open the magazine. If they weren't going to buy it, they'd open it, look at it, and put it back. Because until, you know what's crazy? Magazine shops didn't have any type of porn in front of you unless you went into the back of the magazine. And what Double XL and then their King magazine did was that young brothers like ourselves, obsessed with the magazines, we could look at a little soft porn right off the bat. Like we'd go check it and then, you know, be on our way and shit.
Right,
like that, you know
right.
And that was unheard of. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, it seems commonplace now, but back then, you're right. That wasn't.
Yeah, you got to see what it did in the magazine. Magazine shops weren't even like that. They didn't even allow that kind of stuff. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, like the average cover of a King magazine, though, that would launch it to the back. You know what I mean?
Right.
And now it's in the music, It's in the music section.
Right. And you can see the whole cover. You can see the whole cover.
Like, for example, right? You know the pun picture where he's holding the girl's titties.
Yeah.
Where he's holding her breast. That was supposed to be the album cover.
Wow.
And there was no way that they were going to allow that back then. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Probably now that'd be no big deal if they tried to get it in there. You know, like especially in an underground album, it would be no big deal. But back then, I was like, oh, you can't even do that. You're gonna have to put something else. So that's why the Capital Punishment cover looks like a kind of like another picture.
Right.
You know, it's just his face. You know, grimied up, but it's just his face because that wasn't the cover. You know what I mean?
Right. You kind of touched on something that I find interesting. So, you know, like with hip hop's inception, you always had, you know, dope female MCs that were holding it down, and you know, I mean, and then suddenly you didn't hear about many that, you know, you didn't hear about them as much, and then you know you have a resurgence, and you are having female representation. But it seems to be the only ones that are highlighted are the ones that are fitting a certain mold. You know what I mean? Because like I listened to like sa-roc's last album, right? I mean, I don't know if you heard. I know you heard it.
Sharecropper's daughter, right?
Yeah, great. You know what I'm saying? But I don't ever see you know, these mainstream publications talking about it, or Rhapsody or Chez Noir. But at the same time, we get our doses of Meg and, you know, Nicki and Cardi, and I'm not knocking what they do, because, you know, there was always a lane for that. But the other side of it, where the sisters that are actually rhyming, you don't see that much. You don't see that highlighted as much with the, you know, within hip hop media. Is that the fans not gravitating towards that, or is that media not really seeing value in that?
I mean, they don't write about music.
Right.
They're not music magazines. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? They're
It's
trend magazines.
TMZ.
You
It's
know,
TMZ style now, right?
yeah, they write about trends though, so they wouldn't really write about music. You know, so like really read through magazines and stuff, and they don't really write about music itself. You know what I mean? They
Right.
don't detail music. They tell you how it felt, the music. They might tell you, oh, this song really did its thing, or this is really, you know, but there's no details about the music. So it's
Right.
very easy to not fit a sharecropper's daughter, because the value of that album, no matter how beautiful sa-roc is, right? The value of that album is when you start listening to it,
Right.
you know? And so you're gonna have to write some pages about how you know, it's got that slow burn, you know, like,
Right.
you know, those of us who appreciate skill, we're like, oh, it's got that, you know, that repeat value.
Right.
And then for those that aren't so heavy into lyrics, you've also got to educate the listener, you know, like, you know, you got, you know, the jazz album in the back, you know, that's Sun Ra, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's Pharoah Sanders.
Oh, Farrah Sanders, right. And you've got to educate them, because, like, you know, a Pharoah Sanders album, though, those aren't always easily digestible. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
You kind of have to tell people, like, oh, you have to stick with it. There's certain things that you'll get with. There's certain melodies to get with. Same thing with hip hop. You know what I mean? You have to listen to it for a while. You have to catch nuance. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And all of those things. You know, the detail of it. You know, the detail of it. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like if you were watching sports, though. You know, it's not all just the razzle dazzle of the way Kyrie Irving is dribbling. It's also the way he's, you know, the perfect jumper. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Things like that. You know what I mean? It's
But
things
that's
like
the
that.
thing, though, God. Like with you being a journalist and especially, you know, shining a light on the underground, man. You know, they weekly, you know what I'm saying? There's albums just coming out from an artist is putting out like 12 albums, 10 albums, 8 albums a year.
Yeah.
Like you're not, are you able like to whenever are you able to like, you know, sit with any of these albums and really digest it like that when it come out like
I recently published my reel of 2020, and that piece is 40 pages long, 2200
right.
22,600 plus words, right?
Right.
And even after I listened to it, there were a couple of albums that I forgot about. You know what I mean? Every year I've had to make a detailed list of every album I collect, you know, and it runs me like 200, 300. This year is about 400 albums I got last year, you know. I listen to all of them, you know what I mean? I go into all of them, you know what I mean? I'd say I have a faster ear than most. So I'm getting through some of them, and I know which ones are going to be quality, which ones are going to be, you know, they'll be okay, which ones are going to be in the detailed, you know.
Right.
But and that's why, like, when I did it, I don't do grades, I don't do lists, I don't do any of those things. You know what I mean?
Right.
I deliberately did it where I broke it up into categories that interlope, you know, where let's say if I have a Queens category, which I did, sa-roc would be in there, but she'd also be in the boom bap category, you know what I mean? And the entire point of it is that people would see this entire spectrum of the music and all of this mass amount of music, and they would be able to see that there's all these overlapping styles and techniques that it's almost impossible for someone not to find really quality music that would appeal to them. You know what I mean?
Right.
And not just force themselves to like what is popular.
It seems like that's a lot of that is going on though with certain critics of the culture where they force themselves to like what is, you know, trendy. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I can kind of tell that.
That's
you can tell that they ain't
thing.
really feeling that shit, but you know, it's the end thing to say. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. You know, like, you know how you just said, like, there's a market for it, so I'm not knocking it.
Right.
I've never taken that approach with writing about music, though. You know what I mean? Right. I've always taken the approach that I will knock it. You know what I'm saying? Because everything to me, you know, I went to a business school. And one of the first things they taught was about opportunity cost, and that what you buy with this amount of money, you can't use for this. So the opportunity cost is all the things you couldn't get. if we're talking about, let's say, female MCs and Megan Thee Stallion and Cardi B and stuff, every time that you listen to them or support them, it's the time that you could have heard this other shit.
Yeah.
And no matter what you argue, that truth cannot be denied.
Right.
You spent your time listening to this coon ass shit. But now you didn't take the time to listen to this. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so it has to be knocked. You know what I mean? Because there's really no gauge for the way people are judging. Let's say like the performers. I call them performers. I don't really call them artists or MCs or rap. I don't even want to call them rappers.
Right.
But the performers that are out now, there's really no criteria for them. It's whether they blow or whether they don't, you know? And today's like best journalist is the one that will be able to merge a Sean Price and a Little Baby in the same context as being a world of hip hop.
Right.
That's another reason why I present these lists, you know, because that's not in the world. You know what I'm saying? That's pop music. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's pop music. It uses elements though, but you know, like nobody listens to CNC Music Factory and puts that with Earth, Wind, and Fire. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
That's some other shit. You know what I mean?
Right. But at the same time, though, right? Hasn't hip hop always had pop elements within it? You know, from the days of like Curtis Blow. You know, that had a disco feel to it, right? Like,
you know, the one reason I never really go with that is because people will. See, this is where, like, when I talk about the science of music, where it gets a little bit beyond the music.
Right.
It's not just the genre of hip hop that a journalist in hip hop is covering. He has to have a knowledge of all the genres.
Yeah.
You know, and nothing is more advanced in the blood sucking of it than hip hop. Nothing has been blood sucked faster than hip hop. Right. And yet nothing has survived longer than hip hop. So it's the anomaly, right?
Right.
The reason I don't do that, right, is because if you look at other musics, no one compares the validity or the way a music is made by its very first workings. Like, let's say, like the records that you see, you know, the Pharoah Sanders, especially, So Avant-Garde, you know, Coltrane, all of these things, right? Nobody goes, yeah, you don't really do stuff like that because they didn't do that in the ragtime era, you know?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? They don't do that because those are earlier versions that are not as refined and actually not as free.
Right.
The early
they really weren't free at all.
Yeah, the early concoctions of jazz are so categorized because there were formulas that were beginning to engage the improvisation, the real jewel of what jazz is. Once that happens, you can't judge, you know, what Coltrane's doing by what trumpet players did then. And that's why, let's say with jazz, the beginning is usually Louis Armstrong, because he's really the one that was experimenting within these very rigid styles.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Very rigid styles. So like, I never compare like, you know, records from the 90s or like let's say Nas or anybody like that, or with the commercial appeal, like, and compared back with Curtis Blow or anything. Like, for example, right, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, the way they made records back then wasn't even the way they make records now.
How did they make records?
Because the way they were making records had a strict formula of making their song structure was almost like an R&B song. You know what I mean? They were structuring by a bridge, a melody, and a hook that would be sung, and the lyrics are secondary to the song. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's why the message is so important, because the message, you know, it's guided entirely by the lyrics. You know what I mean?
Right.
But songs, even the early hip hop songs, aren't even made in that fashion. You know what I mean?
Right.
So as it develops, you know, you get content, you get specific techniques that are going to be exploited in things, rhyme techniques that don't exist. And remember, you're putting prose and poetry inside of music that was never done before. So to compare it to the early aspects, right, where people were just performing out in the street, that just doesn't compare. You know what
I
I'm
got you.
saying? It's a totally different thing. So like when people compare, it's like, well, they was partying back then. Also, too, here's the other reason, right?
Mhm.
A lot of people use early hip hop to justify bullshit that goes on now.
Mhm.
But that would be like devolution. You
Mhm.
know, for
Right.
example, I'll give you an example, right? A lot of pop hits in the early 2000s use big 808 drums.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And they almost sound like Run DMC. And articles and people I know would write that, like, oh look, they're taking it back to the old school. And I said, no, they don't know how to use the equipment.
Mm.
You know what I mean? So
Mm.
they're actually reinventing the wheel and devolving, because by
Right.
reinventing the wheel and not knowing how to do it, that's their version of a first time with something.
Mhm.
But I'm not interested, and it sounds, you know, I'm being totally East Coast biased here because the South is on mine. I'm not interested to hear another region like the South, Midwest, or anybody else do their training steps. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And have those training steps put on the same level as the music that I'm hearing, just
Right.
because it's, again, the best of that region. You know what I
Right.
mean? It doesn't
Right.
match up.
I got you.
The best example of the visual to really show the coonery of it, though, is the Hustle and Flow.
Mm. The
I
movie.
thought, yeah, the movie. I thought that showed everything that was wrong about the way hip hop was becoming. And then I saw these guys win Grammys and shit and Oscars, and it'd be a perfect representation of hip hop now.
Mm.
And it was because they didn't know how to use those machines. It's the same thing, you know, we
Is
talk
it
about the
is it
2000s.
that they didn't know how to use those machines, or is it in Memphis that was how they used those machines? You see what I'm saying?
Um, I would
Because
say
like
that's a slick answer.
the reason I'm
That's a
saying that
slick
the reason
answer.
I just threw that out there is because like you mentioned where Miles was from,
Right,
and like I'm pretty sure that there were regional differences in the way
right,
they
right.
play the
But
instrument.
here's the thing, right? Where did Miles learn to play? Was it really in St. Louis?
Mm,
Or was it that time with Dizzy and Bird
mm,
and him slowing down the bebop
mm.
and coming with cool jazz, and then eventually all the innovations, the hard bop innovations and the modal jazz? You know what I mean?
Right,
The
right.
thing, the thing is though, reggaeton is a great example too, right?
Mm-hmm.
They didn't know how to sample.
Mm,
I often found people that didn't know how to sample. They didn't know
mm-hmm.
how to loop it. It's a very hard process back then. You know what
Right,
I mean?
right.
So what was better? Well, if you make these hooks and you just use these easy hooks, then it'll make an easier song, and it also gets you the arena that you want. You know what I mean? It gets you
Right.
the audience that is going to pay the bills. You know, so it's also a double-edged sword. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So how do I deal with it though? Is that I'll admit that these might be the reasons,
Mm-hmm.
monetarily and all those things, but I
Mm-hmm.
still won't justify it as good music.
Right.
You know, or
Right.
music that I wouldn't abolish and destroy if I had the
Mm-hmm.
chance. You know what I'm saying?
So, so let me ask you this, God. All right. So, what's the difference though? Like from what's the difference between hold on, God, my baby daughter, real quick. Hold on.
Uh,
But okay, so yeah, God, what's the difference between like having a certain sound, right? And then, somebody specifically saying, hey, I'm going to make a record for the club. I'm going to make a record for the party. Like, is because, we party and we club like in all
yeah,
regions,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so there's a soundtrack to that, just like there's a
yeah.
soundtrack to,
It doesn't.
other things.
Right, right. That possibility of here's the thing, right?
Mm-hmm,
If I'm going at this like with this hammer approach and
mm-hmm,
bashing, right?
mm-hmm.
People are quick to say, well, what about the quality commercial song? Those are so rare and few and far between that I don't mind destroying whole towns and villages,
Right.
of performance
Right.
for. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I really don't mind. And like the South is a great example because everybody will tell about the South, but no one was there speaking up from the South, like journalists or anybody that was writing and sticking up for the quality, because the South didn't appear with yin yang twins.
Right, right, right,
They appeared with music that
right.
would actually probably more conceptually deeper,
Mm.
you know, musically. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not even going to go with the lyrics because we could battle that too,
Mm-hmm.
but conceptually deeper than what was in New York. And
Mm.
that was very difficult to do. And
Mm.
exactly what you would expect because they were listening to everything.
Yeah.
So like when you had Dungeon Family, that music is massively advanced.
Right.
You
Right.
know, I don't know, you know, like I said, I'm New York, so I get into these arguments all the time, you know, where
Right.
people are like, "Oh, you think Atlians is up there with Hell on Earth?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's musically, it's just as good as Hell on Earth and more innovative because what's more expected? What you heard on Hell on Earth versus Infamous, or what
Right.
you heard on Southern Playalistic in Atlians?
Right.
I mean,
Right. Right.
Atlians is an even more advanced leap
Oh
musically.
yeah,
I
definitely.
mean,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know. I'm the only New York
No,
native, but
I understand where you're going.
so it's
Because
like
being
what
from
it's
the
like is
South,
that this, yeah, like these regions didn't let that be a standard,
yeah,
and that has to do with the media having a
yeah,
very
that's what I was
dominant
gonna say.
influence, you know.
That wasn't
And
always
a
like,
lot of the South to me, a lot of the South to me was destroyed early on. I'm not saying that they're totally destroyed. I'm
yeah,
saying
yeah,
they were destroyed early on, especially in the 2000s, you know, because payola took its took its most money.
mm,
You know, payola was extremely refined then. You know,
mm-hmm,
the biggest piece I wrote for the Source, you know, was about payola and Funkmaster Flex.
mm.
You know, and
You wrote that in the source, God?
yeah, that was in the Source. Yeah, when I was news editor at the Source, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and when I wrote that piece, it took a long time because they didn't want to get sued, so I had to do a lot of back research and prove everything. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting in that is that everybody will insult the DJ that takes the payola,
Mm-hmm.
but they never ask though that that means that what he played were not the artists that were valid, but the people that bought their way in.
Right, right, right.
So every time we talk about Jay-Z, every time we talk about these Yin Yang Twins and all these other, you know, the massive amount of coonery that was infecting the radio in the 2000s, those are the artists that bought their way in. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
So people like Jay-Z, they didn't really give us the hot summers though. They bought us the hot summers. You know what I mean?
That's what I was gonna ask you, God. Like, like Jay-Z is in a lot of people's lists, you know, as top three of all time type situation, right? And I know you feel otherwise. But but with
A little bit.
somebody being you know, he's been in the game obviously a long time, and stayed relevant for a long time. What is it like? So were you ever like a fan of his skill level, or what what is it that kind of deters you from you know, the whole Jay-Z you know, is top
The
five
first
artist type of.
time, the first time I heard Jay-Z was with Original Flavor,
Mm,
and he did Das FX's Flow.
right.
It was for their video. I forget the name of the song on Video Music Box. I saw it,
Mm-hmm.
and I said, "This nigga biting." The next time I heard him was a press copy of Reasonable Doubt.
Mm,
You know what I mean?
mm-hmm.
And I sold it back to Discorama so I could buy new albums.
But
You know
hold
what I
on,
mean?
God. Some people consider that as
I
like.
sold. I'm telling you, this is what it was. I sold Reasonable Doubt to
Mm.
get more albums. You know, like it was. You know, when you used to get piles of records to
Yeah.
sell, it was in that pile. You know what I mean? I just always saw Reasonable Doubt as a poor man's Cuban Links. You know what I mean?
Mm,
And I
mm,
couldn't get around that he sampled the EPMD. You know what I mean?
yeah.
And he didn't sample the original sample. You know, he sampled EPMD.
Ah.
You know what I mean?
Ah.
You really listen closely though.
Mhm.
It's not sampling the original. It's sampling EPMD. So they use
Right.
that, and
Right.
that was, you know, that's blasphemy to me. You know, I don't know why I had to hear that. You know what I mean? But I'll say this though, right? With
Right.
Jay-Z, I think that I have two examples of this though. I had to do it in a negative and a positive pole, right?
Mhm.
I have a term I use called the greatest pop MC of all time,
Mm, mhm,
right?
mhm,
And the negative pole is Jay-Z. He's the
mm.
greatest pop MC of all time, but in a negative sense. You know what I mean?
Right.
he has all the talent in the world. He really has all the skills. You know what I mean? He can really rap any kind of flow, any kind of song he can make. You know what I mean?
Right.
He knows enough to make all types of songs. He can make hooks and all that kind of shit, right?
Right.
But the reason he's relevant most of the time is because he's adapting something that he took from someone of his minions, some of his foot soldiers. I mean, he's a 48 Laws of Power book walking. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
And for those reasons, to me, he's the pop MC. And plus, none of his themes ever come out to be profound to me. This is to me. They never come out profound, you know? I think I put it best with the Marcy Me, you know? I find the whole 444 album one of the most
that's what I was going to ask you. Like, what did you think about that?
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's one of the most hypocritical albums I've ever heard. When he talks about the old New York, it's a New York that he helped destroy. You know, he took part in gentrification. He laughed about it. He scoffed at it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And his first steps into being a billionaire, and I challenge anyone to find me a righteous billionaire.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
His first steps into be a billionaire is to make himself worthy of investment, because there's nothing he created that made him a billionaire.
Right.
You know?
Right.
What he created made him a millionaire. And then working for Def Jam and doing nothing for those artists, right? But doing a disservice for them. And nobody wants to say that.
Why
right?
Why do you say he was doing a disservice to the artists at Def Jam?
If you go back to 2004, though, look at the 2004 to 2006. Look at the Roots albums. One of their best albums. LL Cool J complained about it. Pretty Tony, which should have been a commercial landmark for him, right? That had commercial hits, right? And none of those things did anything. Now, this is a person that already got into the game using payola. So when he gets in there, it's not like he doesn't know how to get it on the radio. Right. You know, if you're an artist signed under him, you're like, if I make the right song, I mean, it should have a clear way into radio. You know what I mean? Right. And none of them did. You know, Game Theory. Where did you hear Game Theory? Any of that? Right. You know, and now that's one of my favorite Roots albums. One of the best ones. You know what I mean? Right. And you didn't hear any of that. So what I'm saying is, like, once he did these ventures, then he started to be someone that you invest in. You know, and I think, as part of a theory of mine, I think original people that become billionaires are a little different than the white man. They're people that have to be invested in to represent and to also be opinion leaders. Right. You know? Right. And, you know, he's a massive opinion leader. What he says, people do, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I remember he had people wearing button downs and
and all that. Yeah, you know, and it's not even true though, you know, because I was wearing button downs, you know, like Hector Lavoe way before, you know what I mean? Right. You know, but the thing is, right, I end up calling Jay-Z the greatest pop MC because of all those things, but it's in a negative sense. When I talk about, I had to amend that and have a positive greatest pop MC, because when I was listening to Busta Rhymes, you know what I mean? Because I was like, if a pop MC could be commercial, do all of the commercial songs that you would think would be trash and they still work. Right. It's comfortable in all these different flows and styles, actually is a superior live MC, right? And could do really all those things and really could rhyme though. You know, he has all the techniques and has all the subject matter. Then it would be Busta Rhymes, you know what I mean? So like that's a thing that I have, you know what I mean? But my thing is this, like people want to know who the payolee is, but they don't want to know who the payoler is, you know what I mean? Right. And they don't want to admit that the songs that you liked are the ones that paid to hear you, you know?
They probably, but you know, a lot of fans probably don't even care though. You know what I mean? Like, because once it's on and it's been played so much that they do like it, they don't really care about the science on why they like something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You know, there was a thing, like when we was doing hip hop, like you would vicariously be represented by that artist. So if they were smart and they were this, that would be you. You know what I mean? Right. Some kids, they don't know that many rappers though. So you see them doing that when they like Kendrick Lamar. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
You know, I think you know, in my MC NBA, you know, he scores 17 points a game. You know, he's all right.
Right, right,
You know,
right.
he's not all-star game. You know what I mean? He doesn't even make my all-star game, but he's dope. You know what I mean?
Right.
And but people don't really do that. They vicariously live through the artist that succeeds. And today's value, you know, of what a great rapper is and things, it's greatly devalued. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's really based on the success, you know. And if you have you know, if you're making lots of money though, that's considered Black excellence. That's
Right.
superior Black capitalism. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
that's what I was gonna say. Yeah, that's all capitalism right there.
Yeah, and if you're great at it though, that's what's winning. But again, a lot of that falls on the media because this is what everybody that I was working with, this is how they would talk. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because they had to latch on to artists that would continue their abilities. Like, you know, you can't be A-list and make a publication that's A-list, gets you money and gets you fed if you don't cover things that people all buy.
Right, right.
So pretty soon, though, you start to really like those things. And there's a different type of like, right? When you make a publication, right? And you put an artist on the cover that's grossly pop and everybody buys your publication and now you're eating.
Right.
It's almost like, thank you, you know, Lil something, I'm eating because of you. You know what I mean? It's almost like that. It's almost like you made the record with him, you know?
Right. Right.
So there's no disconnect. So, you know, that's really what happened to hip hop journalism. That's why I always call them the leeches. You know, they find the leech, the performer that's leeching the culture, and they leech onto that. So it's a leech of a leech, you know?
Right.
This piggybacking leech, you know, and it's one of the things that really bad. Like, you know, even when you said relevant, I was in those rooms when people started using that word. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they started to say, well, what makes him good though? And I said, well, you know, he fucking sucks. His last album was trash. You know, he sounds stupid. You know, he sounds like he's trying to be young. And there's a million reasons why this guy is outdated though. And he goes, no, but he's still relevant. And what does that mean, relevant? It means if we put him on the cover though, people will buy it. They'll be intrigued by what has happened to this guy. You know what I mean? Just like,
so how does someone be as okay, so you know, you definitely said that if he wanted to get in, you know, as far as his hip hop tools, as far as the skills that he has, you know, he could be whatever type of artist that he, you know, wanted to be, right? And I think in some of, you know, a few songs, you know, said lyrically he'd be Talib Kweli, you know, those type of lines. But obviously he, you know, values he has capitalist values, right? And do you think those that is that part of the reason why, you know what I mean? You're like,
yeah, I mean, look, as a writer, I would never say shit like that.
Right.
You know, I'm just thinking like a writer, like, because a lot of my writing, I represent myself.
Right.
You know, I would never say, hey, I wish I could be a real nigga.
Right, right, right.
No, that's what he said. That's what he said. I wish I could be a real nigga, but I'm getting paid doing it this way.
Right, right, right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right, right, right.
Yeah, I don't remember being, you know, doing that. I don't have song. I wouldn't make a song or a poem or a piece and say, listen, you know, so-called, you know, when he said Dame Dash, you know, we didn't sign anything. So, you know, my word is not bond.
Right, right, right.
And everybody's like, yeah, you know, he ain't Santa Claus. You know, his word is not bond.
Right, right, right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like everything is okay. You know, everything is okay. You know, now the contracts, now the word is not bond. All of these things, you know. So and again, look, the truth is, a lot of the things that he had to succeed in, he had to do some things that weren't right and exact.
Right.
I mean,
right.
My thing is that I had already knocked him out the box because of his musical choices. You know what I'm saying?
You mean just the beats that he rhymed on?
Yeah, I mean, he had already been sub part of me through all the In My Lifetime albums. And I don't care how many people keep saying that's a classic, that's this. When you have Premiere on one song, and then you have a weak sample of Glenn Fry on another, and you keep doing that, you know, this yes, no pop gritty, pop gritty, pop gritty.
Mm-hmm.
You're making pop records.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? You're making a diluted product.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but it's very hard to make music because this isn't oppressed music, and it's a music of the oppressed.
Right.
And the way that we're oppressed is through this capitalist society.
Right.
You know what I mean? So the truth is that we have many models of capitalism that we're obsessed with.
Right. Right.
And the major one is the drug dealing. We're
Yeah.
obsessed with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're obsessed with that. So we're very okay. And this is the problem, is that our people in general are very okay with what I call prosperous horrors.
Mm.
It's okay to do something heinous to get your foot in the door.
Right.
Don't worry about these million that I corrupt with this song. I'm going to make a charity for a few thousand.
Right. Right.
So a few thousand people are going to eat, though.
Right.
Don't worry that I corrupted every last kid to just show their ass, though, every day.
Right.
Because my hood, this small little hood that I'm coming from, they're all eating. And so, you know what? That guy's something else. You know?
Right.
I wish I could do. I wish I could get this small hood of 1,000 people eating, and I do it at a sacrifice of the minds of millions of people throughout the whole world.
Wow. So yeah, and with because my views on capitalism and what I think. Yeah, and so when did it become so important? Like you have artists now, right? They come in the game giving the illusion that they're already paid when they got into the game to make music and get paid, right? So like it's like now the whole the image has to be I was rich whenever I started rapping already, or I was, I had this and that whenever I started.
And that's even the case with the MCs we think are incredible.
Right.
I mean,
right.
They've already, they're already rich beyond belief, though. So I don't even know why they're rapping. You know what I mean?
right.
So, but the thing is, though, right? Especially with what I call the crime rhyme MC, right? Mm-hmm. They very rarely speak to us, though. They speak down to us, though.
Yeah,
and all of us
records and have artists talk crazy to us. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we're all custies. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like I've talked about it. He's a leader in the innovation the last decade. But what Rock Marciano record is talking to you? We're all custies,
right?
And we're all squirrels getting nuts in Rock Marciano's world. That's
Right.
There's no way around it. That's just the way he raps, and that's the way it's going to be.
Right.
But then, because he's the leader, everybody has taken on that persona. You know what I mean?
Right.
But the thing is, hip hop, again, this is always a music that needed help to get a forum when it became recorded. So it always needed funders, and our illegal lifestyles funded most of this stuff.
Right.
In the mid 90s, when the music would have its qualitative peak, and you had music of all kinds, right? It still took a lot of illegal money to make a record, because who could afford the equipment to make a song? You know what I mean? Who could afford to get two turntables that are back then $600 each, a quality mixer, amp, speakers, then get the vinyl to sample? You know what I mean?
Right.
And get the sampler. I didn't even talk about getting the sampler yet. And then where to record the music. And then all of the machinery to record it, like the DATs and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
I mean, where are you doing this? And then the other way is to go into a studio that's fully fledged. But you need time and money to go into the studio. So you can't really learn how to use it in the studio, because you'd have to pay to be in there just experimenting. Right. So how else could hip hop start? But illegally.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no other way around it. So it always is going to have that contradiction. You know what I
mean?
No,
and I get that part, and I actually welcome the reality of it. Right. It's the aspect that to where new artists think that this is what they have to do in order to get on. That's the part I don't like, because that's what bleeds on over in the music, and culturally the images that are glorified become the same image. Now if you have a balanced type of image that hip, like, of what the of what the average rapper is, right? You have the rapper that came from this environment, the rapper that came from that environment, and it's going to resonate with people who are from those different environments or know people. But whenever it's all one thing, it just becomes cookie cutter. The record label they can throw you to the side and get another one just like you, because there's nothing that's separating you from the next guy. There's no originality. Like, I want to ask you this, like, what at one time, whenever we speak of balance, there were artists who had a message, even in the midst of telling you about their environment or possible crimes they did. There was always a lot of times there was you know the outcome would be talked about, or they'll drop a jewel on you, like, if you're going to do it, then you might want to, these are some things that you might need to be aware of. Like, what happened to that guy?
I think a lot of it is because when it comes to record labels, for example, right, they only had diversity because they weren't really sure what package was going to work the most. So they were willing to show you a whole bunch of different stuff.
Right.
And all they did was look for star quality. By the time hip hop is even thought of, or just the embryo, record labels and the other man already knew how to spot star quality out of the original man and the original woman. They already knew how to, oh, that's a star right there. You can tell. They've been doing this forever. You know what I mean? I mean, when you look at it, like, once they do that, and once they flood the market with all these different type of styles, then they realize, wait, like all other arts, gun, sex, and violence always sells.
Yeah.
But the only problem we're having, though, is that we're not getting across. We can't get across that much violence. So once they got past the hurdles of sex and violence, especially, like, for example, Doggy Style and the Trials.
One of my favorite albums, by the way.
Yeah, but like the Trials of Ice-T, Doggy Style, like I saw somebody tweet, because Twitter be young though, like their thoughts are so like random and unresearched.
Right.
They'll say stuff that, like, no, that's not really how it went.
Right.
And they're like, Snoop Dogg, he didn't go through anything like the way artists go through now. And I'm like
what?
Snoop Dogg was on the cover of Time magazine, and it wasn't because the next hit rapper, he was on the cover of Time because they were questioning the validity and the worth of his music. You know what I mean?
Right.
And once they got past that hurdle, then now they realize, okay, we pretty much could get any type of music out there.
Right.
Which one sells the most?
Right.
And it's always the same formula. Sex and violence sells the most. And they go with that. You know what I mean?
Do you think that, like, so much? All right, so because I saw a few people who are artists or people who are just of the culture, and some people think that so much of it is this, with the same images being portrayed and content being the same all across the board when it comes to what is found in the mainstream. Does that affect culture and communities as a whole, as far as, I mean, don't get me wrong, we know at the end of the day, a lot of our environments were caused from systemic oppression and, evil capitalism and all types of things. But as far as the images that we're being exposed to as a community, does that have an effect on our mind and our outlook and our worldview?
I definitely think so now, because so much it's so spoon-fed. Just like there's a flood of great music,
right?
It's a lot like if you amplified, like, a lot of jazz, like the jazz that we love. Like my favorite era of jazz is the 50s into the 60s, all the soul jazz, the modal jazz, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's my favorite too.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And but jazz wasn't selling so much then. You know what I mean? And that's why I had to get into more of a funk jazz. And then, some of the records even became discoed out, you know what I mean? Right. And some of these guys made some shitty records, you know what I mean? And it's funny because hip hop is founded on a lot of shitty records. You know, a lot of early hip hop is sampling because it's easier to find a groove in, you know, in Freddie Hubbard's late records than it is in his quality 70s records, you know, his best 70s records, you know?
Right, right.
And so what happens is, the way I see it is that the commercial landscape is so overloaded. The average person thinks that that is rap now.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's why I still call this era the invisible renaissance. Because if you ask the average person, though, they have no idea that there's this entire underworld of artists that are way better. So like when I write about artists and people say, hey, look, he wrote like what he thought was the best of the underground.
Right.
I don't consider what I write about the underground. I'm writing about hip hop. You're writing about other shit that isn't hip hop.
Right.
So when you write about Lil Baby, when you write about Drake, and you write about all of them, you're writing about pop music with rap elements. I'm writing about hip hop. I don't know what the fuck you're writing about.
Right.
I'm not. Don't put my shit underground. I'm writing about hip hop. You know, you're writing about something else. You know what I mean? And that's why I do that. That's why I make those lanes very clear, because there isn't an aspect of any culture in any of the songs that's being made. So there is no development of a skill set. There's no parts of any song that deliberately show technique, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's no parts of a song where they say, listen, let me show you my creativity.
Right.
You know? They're really just saying jingles, you know what I mean? And most of the stuff really relates, though, because the themes are so universal. They would relate to anybody.
Right.
You know, like today's rap on the radio, it's more like the themes are so universal that it would literally be like, yo, I love chew the first chew of that bubble gum. All the sugar comes out.
Right.
And everybody's like, yo, that's so true.
Right.
Facts. And you know, the instant Twitter goes nuts, facts, you know. You know, that hit different when he said that, you know, and I'm like, yeah, that's what happens when you chew in a gum. Everybody, you know.
Right. Right.
You know, and a lot of the depth is really just, it's almost like today's rappers, though, that are in the mainstream, they're almost like a baby Seinfeld, because they talk about simple observations and they become these deep concepts, you know. Even all the hype about like Drake and all that stuff, a lot of his relationship talk is very, very basic.
Right.
No, it's really basic.
Right.
Especially when you compare it to like things like Ghostface and others have. And there's such a depth to the relationships and the ideas and the stories. Man, everybody relates to Drake, though, because even a high school kid could think about that in a thought. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's really not that complex. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then people make a random statement, though, and then if it just sounds jingly, you know, he's got flow. You know?
Right.
It's such a substandard, and that's really like, it's ultimate. It's like extreme disco. It's like a major ultra disco of it all. You know,
it's to the point, like, and so just to clarify something that I said, like, as far as content in hip hop, if it's dope, it's dope. You know what I mean? Like, and authentic, I'm with it. You know what I'm saying? It was just the cookie cutter part of it where you feel like you got to be Tony Montana to make it. You know what I mean? Like, but that wasn't that's not you. You know what I'm saying? That's what I have an issue with. But when it comes to what you classify as a pop record, I've noticed, like, you remember at one time you would hear a beat, right? And then you would be like, yo, that's Premier, or you hear a beat, oh yeah, that's Dre, or you hear, oh, that's DJ Quick, or that's Pete Rock. You could tell without them even putting their they didn't have beat tags then, right? Like, they weren't really saying their name. Now it's become like, I can't tell who made the beat. I can't tell where nobody's from. Like, what brought that on? You know, like this universal, because I like my hip hop regional, because I like to be able to put on a record from New York
Right,
or
right.
Cali
See,
or
that
Texas.
was what was important about hip hop, was that
Right,
even though I said every region has to be good enough to compete to be the top,
right,
you don't get to be the top just because you're the only one from that region halfway decent or you're the best of a region.
right,
However, every single place has to make their own unique version of what they're doing.
right,
And eventually, doesn't mean that just because you made it, it's worthy. But eventually it could develop into being worthy if they had the ethos and they knew the origins and they subscribed to the way the culture was originally made.
mm-hmm.
As far as the creativity, being original and challenging themselves to actually know what was already done. Because a lot
Right,
of stuff you could tell they didn't really know what was done already,
mm-hmm.
or care about what
Right,
was done already,
right,
you know. But I think that we see all these regions blow up, right? And that's a real detriment to the culture itself, that
mm,
no region has its own distinct styles anymore. You know what
right,
I mean?
right,
It's horrible. It's
yeah,
horrible because it also means that you're not you're not really giving any of the youth in those areas a unique way of expressing
mm,
themselves. The
right,
way they
exactly,
talk, the way they talk from their own places, the way they move, all of those things, the
right,
different dialects, none of that stuff. You know what I mean? And
mm-hmm.
then when they include something that would be unique, they only can include a slight fraction.
Right,
And then what is not that impressive becomes overly amazing.
right,
And that's
right,
a problem, and that's a
right,
problem. And again, a lot of this stuff is really because the first major groups to be immediate, in the door, out the door, 15 minutes of fame performers were
mm-hmm.
coming from the South. They were
Right.
immediately signing them and doing that. So
Yeah,
that
they were
became,
trying to they were trying to find the next
yeah,
Cash Money or No Limit
yeah.
at one time.
See, yeah, and I always felt that the quality that, I think Dungeon Family and what they did in the mid 90s was so crucial, because it set a standard where everybody could say, listen, we could make music this quality and we could talk about things and not have to sound like a genius from the East Coast. We don't have to sound like Karis One to say deep
Right,
shit. We
right,
don't
right,
have to,
right. Yeah.
because that's a New York way of sounding. We don't have to sound like Rakim when we get deep. You know what I mean?
Right, right, right.
And all those kind of things. We can keep a lot of style,
Mm-hmm.
and they were adding a lot of style.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the things that they were saying had lots of style, and they also were able to speak about distinct problems. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I said, to me, as far as like talent level,
Mm-hmm.
I have always felt that the work that CeeLo and Andre had,
Mm-hmm.
their skill levels are GOAT level.
Yeah.
As far as GOAT level skill levels, they had all of
Agreed.
the tools,
Mm-hmm.
all of the tools. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think that once people saw that, wait a minute, all of these regions can start coming with really quality depth and real insightful stuff, they put the clamps on that,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's not a formula that's going to be a winning formula. And it's also going to be something that educates them.
Yeah. Yeah.
See, the thing is, right?
Everybody
How
can't
does
just jump in and
how
do
does
it.
the conspiracy work, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have evil white people that go, look, we can't have intelligent rappers because then they'll.
Right.
That's not really how it works, though.
Mm-hmm.
The way it works, though, is that we're not controlling the music.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not controlling the music, then someone that isn't an artist is controlling the music. And
Right.
usually it's a white person that doesn't make music.
Right.
So
Right.
what happens is that he says, if the artist is too smart
Mm-hmm.
about what I'm doing, then he could just make his own shit without me.
Mm-hmm.
You see?
Mm-hmm.
And the only type of artist that really gets to that level is the smart one.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
we don't want no fucking Ray Charles. We don't want none of these smart niggas to come through and then they realize the whole formula and they could make their own music. And then there is no bad music. So now people are forced to really pick the quality that they like.
Mm.
Now we can't have any of that shit though.
Right. Right. Right.
Where do my pockets go?
Right.
Now you realize that they're just a middleman, just
Right.
like we realize now, like all the music that we get, we're getting it without a middleman.
Right. Right.
The best music today is without a middleman.
That's why it's able to come out so fast. They don't have to go through that red tape anymore.
Yeah. The only the real problem with the quality of the music today, like we just talk about the best music, is going to be the artist's ability to A&R themselves.
Right. Right.
And it is not as easy as you think, because, you know, the artists, we see them on Twitter all the time. They masturbate themselves to high hell.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? And so every time they make a song, they're like, yo, I just made the greatest thing ever. And
Right.
I actually see tweets like this, you know?
Right.
Like everything Westside Gunn releases, he says it's the greatest masterpiece ever. You know what I mean?
I wanted to ask you about them, God. I didn't mean to cut your wisdom, but they
right.
are what, you know, a lot of purists would say are representing the culture the way it should be. You know, lyrically, they're obviously, you know, really dope artists. What do you think about what's going on in upstate New York, and the fact that you're from New York City, right? And there are and it seems like, you know, in a lot of people's mind, like upstate New York is holding it down for the whole state compared to
I don't,
because I know you've seen that, you know what I'm saying?
when people do that, that's, to me, in real life, that is really not an issue.
Right.
Like when you're here in New York, you're not going like, damn, those people up. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
I got
that's not really how it works. Like,
right.
It doesn't really work that way. But so to me, it doesn't really matter. You know what I'm saying? It really has very rarely mattered, like the region that it comes from. You know, as long as it sounds dope to me. You know what I mean?
Right.
However, though, right? I just think that Griselda in general is not really written about correctly. And that's why they get to write their own histories.
Right,
you know?
right.
And I don't mean it like in the first degree in the 1 to 40.
That's what I was gonna say. Right.
I mean it like they get to document what they did, because they're writing their own history in advance. They said they were going to do it, they do it, right? Not that, but they get to document what the impact of it all is. And a lot of the documentation they do is wrong. You know?
In what way?
The truth is Griselda blows up because they're basically the 2010s and ons. They're the little brother of hardcore hip hop. You know what I mean? They're literally a retro group.
Right.
There's very little original stuff that they give you.
You don't think their sound is original?
I mean, really, if you break it down piece by piece, there's all of its large pieces are not original. You know what I mean? The minimalist beats, the stuff that Beat Butcher and Derringer do, though. I mean, that's all basically Mobb Deep 96. That's really all. Just the BPMs are much slower. Because, you know, now everybody just wants to rhyme on like 1 BPM a minute. You know what I mean? Everything is like, you know, boom. Yeah. If you listen, though, a lot of stuff does have drums, but it's so slow that it might as well not be there. You know what I mean?
Right.
You know, it might as well not be there. But the thing is, right, the music is retro. The themes that they have are definitely all retro. I mean, they haven't invented anything new that they've talked about. Not one thing. You know what I mean? They can't say that they're innovators like the way Rock Marciano has innovated new styles or stylistic techniques of delivery and things like that. You know, they haven't really been able to capture like the lyricism like the way Akkad does of that experience, right?
Right.
So there really is nothing massively original that they do. In fact, all of the unique things that we talk about with them, like let's say like the ad-libbing that Westside Gunn does. Now I'm not gonna say, oh, he does yo, yo, yo like Ghostface, right?
Right.
Not even that, but like the ad-libs being so part of it. A lot of people will go, that's Eminem's thing, but that's really stuff that Thurston Howe was doing a long time ago.
Right.
You know what I mean? Through the entire 2000s. The stuff that Method Man was doing with Redman and having like real intricate ad-libs that go along with the songs. You know what I mean? And of course, Eminem as well, because that's where he learned it from. He learned it from Thirst. You know what I mean? But the thing is, everything they do is such a perfect formula. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it basically is a perfect storm. Just like Little Brother's a perfect storm.
Yeah.
Little Brother releases at a different time. You just go, I can't tell you how many groups had Pete Rock sounding vibes and the same exact vibe, you know what I mean? That were there, because no one can say, well, but they had Fonte, because I think Fonte is a next level talent.
Yeah, he is.
Fonte wasn't the Fonte we know when he first started.
Right.
That first Little Brother album, he's not this, diverse,
Yeah.
R&B,
I
hip
think
hop.
he's always
Like,
been like I think
yeah,
he always knew music, you know what I mean? But he
right,
definitely,
right. But it's not shown on that album. It's
right,
just good MCing.
right,
And they were like the ultimate retro group. They
right,
were the thing like, okay, the music that we love is not gonna die. For some
right,
reason, that was the thing. It's two
right,
things that make retro blow up, right?
right.
It's for us that what makes us feel better that the music is not gonna die like the actual traditional way.
Hmm.
Even though we want to hear progressive stuff, the traditional way isn't gonna end.
Yeah,
But then it also sells to a lot of white niche markets because they want something that seems a little bit simpler
right,
because they're catching on late all the time.
right, 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 right,
So when Little Brother comes, though, that sound is mad innovative to them.
right,
Whereas to us, though, it's just a high quality sound.
right.
Like when you hear Griselda, those beats are not anything more mind blowing than
Hmm.
the shit Alchemist is making. In fact, it's not as good as the stuff Alchemist is making because he's digging better.
Right, right,
He's getting better crates than he ever
right,
has before.
right.
But the thing is, though, is that you're like, okay, look, that Mobb Deep shit isn't gonna die. Okay, that's great, and that's what
Right,
everybody will tell you that don't have a big collection of music of today's music.
right.
Because everybody that loves Griselda is really hip hop people that are older that stop collecting, that have no idea that this renaissance, because it's invisible,
Yeah, yeah.
that the specks of the waves that hit the shore are Griselda, but the entire ocean is much more vast. Man.
Right, right.
So I'm okay with them being the waves that hit the ocean because
Hmm.
they represent dope. There's only one record they've made that I really don't like. You know what I mean? But all of them have been dope. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What about 2020 it had some good records come out, a lot actually. And social media has kind of given the album of the year crown to Stove God. What did you think about that album?
Hmm. Well, a lot of people forget that Stove God didn't rhyme like that before.
Right, right.
He always rhymed when he was rolling with Lord Jamal.
Mm-hmm.
He had all of those stop-start techniques. A lot of charismatic turns and conversational, pauses and
Right.
injections or whatever you have, inflections all around.
Mm-hmm.
It's when he gets with Rock Marcy that he becomes like the Stove God. You know what I mean?
Yeah, total rebrand, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it is a rebranding that people don't want to act like they don't notice it. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it's there. I always thought, Cooks had massive talent.
Mm-hmm.
Once I saw him with Lord Jamal and he was rhyming, I was like, this kid, he can make dope records easily.
Right.
I mean, and I think that the debut is a Reasonable Drought is a dope record.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's a record I don't want to hear again.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The more, if I have to hear that album again, you know what I'm saying? As,
Right.
I don't know, in my Trife Time, Volume 1, like if he just keeps on and just does the same shit,
Right.
it's going to get very tired because it's really tiresome to hear. One of the things about the 2010s hip hop is that some of the best lyricists technically are crime rhyme MCs.
Yeah.
So you see some of the most gifted lyricism, but from the most rigid content.
Right. Right.
And it's almost like Raekwon is the father of all this shit.
He definitely is, God. He definitely is.
There's Raekwon in almost everything that you hear today. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, though, to take it to the next level that Raekwon took it, they have to get into more detail about what was happening.
Yeah.
So if Raekwon told you they was doing a thing and he had the picture with the Pyrex,
Mm-hmm.
they have to tell you the steps in the Pyrex. Now they have to be the cooking show.
Right.
Now they have to be, if you had the rapper on the corner, though, now they have to tell you, well, if he told you how it was from 4 o'clock to 9 o'clock, right? Mm-hmm. Now I have to tell you what happened between 4:15 and 4:45.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I have to give you more details. Stories have to be more detailed. So you get like all these guys, whether they're Flea Lord, whether they're others, they have to be so intricately detailed that we end up hearing like stories that become really, really like gratuitous and very, they give you fatigue.
I think that's kind of how they're showing you that hey, I'm authentic with this. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like,
it's the only way. Like
yeah,
I can't just say I had a brick because
yeah,
everybody
yeah,
else said that. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying?
yeah,
Like I've
exactly.
heard so many drug raps, God, that I could actually make my own coke dealing album.
Right, right, right,
I
right,
could
right.
actually make one. You know what I mean?
Right, right, right.
If I'm gonna do one, let's just do one. You know what I mean? Like the whole thing. We do the whole thing. You know what I mean? I,
Um,
yeah, you know, like rap. There's so much rap out there. You could rhyme about all the things you never did in pretty good detail.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
You
Yeah,
know?
you can, because I mean it's been years of hearing
Yeah.
that shit. Even if you
You know,
never did
like
it, you know what I
you
mean?
know,
You know the steps.
you know how to roll. You know how to roll blunts. You know how to sip coke. You know how to, everything.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, yeah.
So
Well,
like there's
I,
no way I would say Reasonable Drought is the best record that I heard though. You know what I mean? No way.
well, if you were going to give that out, if you were going to give an album that the best that you heard in 2020, even if you can't just necessarily choose one, what were some of them that you thought? Because I know you wasn't really feeling the Nas record like that, right? Um,
Yeah, I love everything Nas does though, but not every song he does. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah, I got you.
You know?
Um,
Again, see, that's why I don't pick a great record, like the best records, because I think people, if they're a collector, they have to get every Nas record.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
You have to hear every Nas record. You know what I mean? Because he'll have at least 5 classics, not 5 good songs, but 5
right.
classic records. And if he's made 13 albums, how many classics is that over if you
Oh
just
yeah,
have 5? You
yeah,
know, man,
yeah,
it's impeccable.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
yeah, it's impeccable. I thought like the person that blew me away, like as far as techniques, um, lyricism is always where I go first.
Hmm.
As a writer, it was easily Killer Priest.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
The 3 albums that he released, so and he
The
did so many things on that. It was a joy to listen to. It was a joy to see where he would take certain records.
right, right, right.
It was a joy to hear, especially like Jordan River Banks did 2 of them.
Hmm.
It was a joy to hear that they were mining different music, a lot of Indian classical, a lot of
Yeah.
other types of music, you know what I mean?
Right.
And matching the ideas with stuff like that. And if you really listen to it, Killer Priest was really rhyming on different techniques, different narrative flows. I mean,
Hmm.
you don't hear too many records where a person could do whatever he wants. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he rapped from the perspective of a Native American smoking a peace pipe,
Yeah.
hallucinating about his ancestors. Like, dude, like, you know
And
what
he was
I mean?
doing the different voices. He was
Right.
doing, yeah, like he just
Right.
was going everywhere with it. And it was just like, yeah, it's a record I sit back and listen to, but every year that in this last decade, if Ka releases something, it's
Oh yeah.
it's really at the top of the list because
Hmm.
he's one of the greatest writers. He's one of the greatest Black writers of the generation. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether it's hip hop, literature, whatever it is, you
Right.
know what I mean? Everything he does is amazing. You know what I mean?
He got shit that you kind of got to slow down and like. I mean, I don't think he does. Like, you're not gonna catch everything the first listen. You know what I'm
No,
saying?
no. But the more you listen to him, the more like, yeah, he said some dope shit.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
gonna have to
yeah.
listen to this a few times. You know what I mean?
Right.
And those are the type of records I go with the most. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
There are very few records where today that are made where I'll tell you that they're incredible just because of the music.
Yeah.
I still don't think that producers today, they make albums that are immediately musical classics.
Right.
They'll make whole albums that musically are great and could be classic, but
Mhm.
they still need the artist to go with it.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
I don't see that happening too often lately. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right.
But I mean that piece that I wrote was like, it was fucking 40 pages, and I was writing forever on some of these things. You know what I mean? And
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, God. Like, before we wrap it up, like for the people that aren't necessarily familiar with, your radio show and your website, can you just build about that a little bit?
yeah. The website I was telling you, that started around 2000. I started in 2012 with that, and that was with me, my brother Paragon that designs it. and Kevlar 7, who passed away.
Rest in power.
You know what I mean? Bronze Nazareth's older brother, beatmaker, great MC. You know what I mean? And man, if it wasn't for him, you know, I really wouldn't have that forum to write.
Right.
And Premier Hip Hop is where I write everything that I give out.
Right.
You know, but the two podcasts that I do is DJ Toshi's Classic Storm Radio, right? And really, you know, Toshi's a New York landmark. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
The entire the most critical shows where artists are displayed. 80% of those shows are his. You know, him and Doc Ock doing the Rock the House shows. You know, they literally, you know, the last couple of years they have New York on their back. You know, if you want to see the best, you know, underground artists, the ones that should be out there, all of them, that's really there. So I do the interviews for him. I host the show. And that's where I get my challenge, because I don't pick the artists for that. I might suggest them, but I don't pick them. You know what I mean? Even though you know, me and Toshi are always alike. You know what I mean? And then I do my own PowerWrite show.
Right.
So the PowerWrite show, actually, the name came from Bones Malone. Because Bones Malone saw me in a picture with Prince Power. He wrote Power Rule and PowerWrite.
Nice. Right.
So I started to call that, you know, I started to say this is the PowerWrite show. And the show was basically showing my element of hip hop, the hip hop writer. And, you know, featuring interviews, all of that stuff, my thoughts, you know, whatever it is I'm talking about in hip hop, you know what I mean? And I do that through S Street Media, you know? What I'm also doing now is I'm doing a magazine now called The Cast Faction.
Okay.
And it's basically going to be a magazine about the podcast.
Oh, nice. Okay.
You know what I mean? So it's going to cover.
It's kind of like a companion type of thing.
It's not just a companion to what we have at S Street Media, but it's going to be about all podcasts. So we're going to have writers talking about podcasts. We're going to have writers talking about the issues that relate to podcasts. So basically it could be anything, because, you know, podcasts cover everything. Right. You know what I mean? And then featuring, you know, podcasts that are up and coming like yourself, you know, and others. And, you know, that's the other thing I do, you know. And if you're trying to get knowledge yourself, obviously I teach at a law school in Mecca. Right. I've been teaching at a law school in Mecca since 2000. It's
21 years, God. Wow.
Yeah, it's the longest running class ever taught at that school, you know, ever taught at a law school in Mecca. And because of COVID and everything like that, I teach it online a lot of times. Like this month, I've been teaching it exclusively online because it's, you know, a law school in Mecca is a voluntary walk-in school. You know what I mean? And the students that I have, there are still issues with people being comfortable just having anyone come in. You know what I mean? In such a small space. So I'm always online with that, you know, teaching that, and also working with 5% Media as one of the editors and writers and stuff, you know, and that's about the Nation of Gods and Nerds and everything dealing with that, you know. And then along with that, it's just all the books I'm working on. I'm working on a book about the Dark Ages, you know, as we speak, because there's so many writings I have. I'm working on a couple of philosophy books. And also, and they're starting to be released now. There's a lot of songs that have been released with me on it. So I've been doing a lot of spoken word verses and things like that. You know what I mean? And then, you know, there might be a nice little EP coming.
Come on, you know what I'm saying? We need that, God.
Yeah. So right now I got a song I'm part of a group called The Leftovers, right? Led by Prince Power, and it's basically The Leftovers is like a derogatory term thrown at all the original people that were that were still in New York. Right. And he literally heard this. You know, Prince Power literally heard this, and them being, you know, Puerto Ricans out in Bushwick and other places referred to as the leftovers. So he was like, you know what, we are the leftovers, you know. Right. And all of us became a conglomerate, you know, producers, you know, promoters, all that, you know, me with the spoken word. And so on that album I lead it off, but that album is out now. I'm on
what's the name of the album?
The album is called The Leftovers.
So that's the name of the album, The Leftovers.
The group is called The Leftovers NYC, and the name of the album is called Engraved in New York.
Okay. Right.
That's on Bandcamp.
Okay.
And there's a lot of stuff I'm coming out on, but I know what's definitely coming out like really soon is uh I'm on Skank's new album.
Mm.
One of my favorite MCs. He's
Mhm.
one of the great MCs of this era.
Mhm.
Great performer. You know, he can do everything.
Mhm.
I'm on his album. We got a song. And I'm also on Napoleon the Legend's next album.
Oh wow, okay.
So he has an album produced by Akhenaten, out in France and stuff.
Mhm.
Big producer, the producer of I Am. And I got a song. I'm on a song with him in Sky Zoo.
Oh,
So
nice.
yeah,
Right,
so,
right,
you know,
right.
doing a couple of
Yeah,
things.
yeah. And
Throwing more-
Skyzoo had a great year in 2020.
Yeah, yeah. You know, he's exactly what I think would be if radio was good and right
Mhm.
and all
Right.
proper. He would be that charismatic MC that you would hear every day. You know, in
Yep.
1,000 times. You know what
I
I
can
mean?
see that.
You
Yep.
know, he has all the charisma, all the techniques. You know, but it's not like that. We live in a different
Different
alternate
time.
universe,
Yep.
right?
Yep. And I want to say, man, I definitely appreciate you for coming on.
Oh, no doubt.
The bill could have lasted longer, but I don't want to hold you. You know what I'm saying? Because
No, it's definitely peace, man. I love what you're doing with Wise the Dome. Yeah, that's
and
dope, man.
appreciate you, bro. Appreciate you, man. In the future, I definitely probably want to have you back on. You know what I'm saying? Have more discussions about the culture. I mean, you're such a a pioneering figure in hip hop journalism, and especially having knowledge yourself and coming from that perspective. It's always dope to pick your brain, bro. So definitely, again, I appreciate it, G.
Indeed, God. Peace to the God.
Peace to the God.